This is the Tree of Life, Season 27, Chapter 2. In this episode, we will be talking about the domains hierarchies permit infinite recursion and the domains where they prevent it. In the last episode, we talked about how networked hierarchies enable infinite recursion in certain domains. That is, the compelling of acquiescence is due to non-rigidity produced by overlapping or conflicting domains. However, in certain domains recursion is facilitated by the networked hierarchy producing a new consensus according to certain objects, a set. Now, in this episode, I would like to provide a general rule which governs where networked hierarchies will permit infinite recursion and where they will not. In short, infinite recursion is permitted by a domain when it expands the domain. This can happen spatially, or it can happen by archetype. Spatially, a hierarchical relationship will still enable infinite recursion where that recursion expands the domain. Hierarchical domains possess territoriality. That is, in the intersection of two individuals who are part of the same hierarchy, there is a movement of spatial territoriality. This means, for example, that when a subordinate individual in one hierarchy, in one domain, is in another domain where they are hierarchically superior, the expansion of the first domain entails the compelling of acquiescence upon the second individual in that second domain. This interaction results in an accumulation of territoriality to the domain, or a movement of territoriality from one domain to another. By archetype, infinite recursion is permitted when it imports the archetypal vocabulary of the lower domain into the higher. That is, when one individual is subordinate to another hierarchically in one domain, expansion of that domain sees the importation of the archetypal vocabulary of that lower domain into a higher domain. An example of the spatial form is the intrusion of an hierarchically superior individual in a lower domain to a higher domain where they are subordinate. This shifts the territoriality from one domain or hierarchy to another. An example of the archetypal form is the intrusion of the language of subordination in one domain to a higher domain. Non-hierarchically facilitated recursion sees the shifting of archetypal language from a lower domain to a higher domain through sublimation. An example of this is provided by this podcast, where a lower domain sees archetypal language imported to a higher domain producing a shift in consensus through that domain. On the balance, recursion is not permitted by the hierarchy where it contracts the domain. This means that the archetypal vocabulary of higher domains is imported into a lower domain. All of this is self-explanatory, as we see that in sequential substitution, the substitutionary set expands through infinite recursion. In other words, infinite recursion is inherently expansionary. So we see that it makes sense that hierarchies would tie that recursion to expansion of the domain corresponding to a choice. That's the end of the podcast for today.